Hello everybody and welcome to Independent Art Storytime. We're working our way through John Masefield's Christmas classic, The Box of Delights, and today we have Chapter 10, Part 2. Quick recap. In the world outside the box, Abner Brown has scrobbled the entire clergy, Caroline Louisa and Peter and the Punch and Judy man, and he's holding them all to ransom because he's going to cancel the Christmas service unless he gets the Box of Delights. Meanwhile, Kay has gone into the box to try and find an ancient magician, Arnold of Tody, who he thinks has connections to the Box of Delights and is hoping that's going to solve all his problems. However, he has jumped aboard a ship rowed by pirates who have now left him marooned on a desert island, and he's hungry, in search of food, and he's just smelled something delicious. "Oh," he said, "there are people. That's something being cooked." There was no doubt about it. Something very nice was being cooked not very far away. And then Kay thought, supposing when I come through the jungle I find it's a whole lot of cannibals cooking Man Friday or his brother. I wish I knew what roasted man smelled like. Somehow, the smell in his nostrils seemed too pleasant to be the smell of toasted man, and he went on with increasing hope that he would soon come to someone who would feed him. He heard on ahead the pleasant splash of falling water. At this point, somewhere beyond him in the jungle, an old man's wavering voice began to sing a song. As from the first, it seemed a very queer song, and Kay sat down on a fallen tree to listen to it. This was the song. "When I was 3 or 2 or 1, I used to go to bed on sun and wake on mun, and when I went to bed on Tues, I woke on wed, as true is trues, and could not choose. When Thurs or Fry, when Fry on Sat, when Sat on sun, it all fell plat, and that was that. And now that I am 4 or 5 or 6, it is another bag of tricks. It's a mix. For when tomorrow's bedtime say, I never, never wake today, but yesterday. Yesterday or the day before, or 2 months since, or 3 or more, in years long over. And sometimes, of course, I find this pleasant. I never really love the present, except when eating roasted pheasant, or reading Greek. But still sometimes I stand aghast, stuck in the week before the last, with all the present turned to past, and now last week. And what is worse, I sometimes fear, it isn't now at all that's here. No, but next year. Next year, or worse, some year beyond, in future time, unkenned, unconned, as far away as Trebizond from Tody Weir. And this I ask and fain would know, will now be in a day or so? Is this time next year now or no? Or did now happen long ago, long, long ago? And was tomorrow yesterday? Or had it been and gone today? Will no one say? I wish someone would say. The voice trailed off from the tune here, and the song ended. The singer muttered to himself 2 or 3 times. Yes, indeed, truly, I wish someone would say. The fact of the matter is, they don't know. Something in the voice made Kay feel sure that the singer would not harm him, and he rose from his log and pushed through the scrub towards him. After a few yards, the jungle was less thick. He came through the jungle to a clearing where he saw the mouth of a cave. A bubbling spring falling down some rocks near the cave mouth into a rocky pool, and an old man sitting beside a fire, toasting 2 bananas stuck upon skewers, which he held, 1 in each hand. Kay limped towards this old man, who looked at him and said, "Italiano?" Kay shook his head. The man said, "En français?" Kay, who was on surer ground, said, "Non, English." The old man looked at him in astonishment and interest. "Come then," he said kindly, "sit, eat, drink," and he took the toasted bananas from the skewers and put them on a broad leaf and offered them to Kay with a big shell full of water. Kay, who was really very, very hungry, ate the bananas with thankfulness, and he looked at the man who'd welcomed him. He was extraordinarily old, ragged-haired and tatter-bearded. He was dressed like a scarecrow in a most strange patchwork of palm leaves, bits of old sail, and what may once have been leather. Presently the man spoke in strange English. "Excuse me," the man said. "Make pardon. What year in Anno Domini is this?" 1935, Kay said. "What you say? 1900? Yes," Kay said, opening his hand 3 times and then showing 4 fingers. 1935. "In the future or in the present?" "In the present," Kay said. "Oh," the old man said. "What a thing is time! I've got lost in time. Tell me, please, sir," Kay said with interest, "are you Mr. Arnold of Tody?" "I was once, young Englishman," he said, "but that was when I belonged to the year of our Lord, which I went out of by my own act. I would have none of it. I went back into the past, and should therefore have a name from the past, such as Alexander." "And why did you go back into the past?" Kay asked. "Why?" Arnold said. "Because of the dullness of the time into which I was born." "But tell me, you say are English. You will please excuse and pardon. The English I have never seen. It is true that we Italians conquered the land. We have a legend that the English are like rabbits, in that their front teeth stick out. But they are unlike rabbits in that they have tails. You are a strange people." "We haven't tails," Kay said. "The fact is well known." "But about time. I'm rather behind in present time. Perhaps I am not in modern time at all, but in future time. It isn't past time. You asked me why I went back into the past. So many things happened in the past. In my young days, life in my country was tedious to a man of thought. I made a way to get back into the past, a certain box. You may not credit it, but a man came all the way from Spain to offer me the elixir of life in exchange for it. He gave me a sip of the elixir, and I let him see my box, but I would not make the exchange, for I could get back into the past by my box, that is, into the past of Europe. Young Englishmen, I do not consider that the past of Europe is worth consideration." "I don't know," Kay said. "A good many things have happened in Europe. The Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire, Napoleon the Great, the Battle of Waterloo, and the Great War." "The Great War," Arnold said. "It was to see that I gave away my first box and spent years finding a way into the past of Asia. Tell me, in the time that you know, do they speak much of Alexander the Great?" "He is mentioned sometimes," Kay said. "Imagine it," Arnold said. "Mentioned sometimes. Is not that typical of European things and people, rulers and ruled alike, childish, trivial, wanting in will?" "You can't call Julius Caesar that," Kay said. "He only imitated Alexander," Arnold said, "besides he was bold. I was delighted that he met the end he did. My race, the Italian, has never been renowned for intelligence. They never showed it more clearly than in ending that public pest. What is your Christian name, young man?" "Kay," Kay answered. "You ought to change it to Alexander," Arnold replied. "Young men should have prosperous names, names to live up to. K isn't a name, it's a letter of the alphabet. It is the Greek kappa. We Italians dispensed with it." "Did you ever meet Alexander?" Kay asked. "Young man," Arnold said, "I was weary of life in Tody, so I made my box, and wandered into the past of Europe. Oh, it was so dull. Dreary kings, dreary murders, silly wars. So I got out of it as soon as I could. I went into the past of Asia, and do you know, a lot of that is very dull. Silly wars, you know, rather dreary kings, not very much thought, and then suddenly, in one of those cities in Asia Minor, I first saw Alexander. You never met Alexander." "No, indeed," Kay said, I never did." "You ought to set to work," Arnold said, "to make yourself a box like mine, and that would take you to where you would meet with Alexander. As the present, no, that this is the present, it seems like the future. I do not know where he is, but he exists forever in the past. He was the finest young man that ever trod this planet, beautiful, like young Apollo. The sculptors and painters, when they wanted to carve or paint a god, all turned to him. He was all beauty and strength and wisdom. He only had to ride down the street on that horse of his that spoke with a man's voice, and every man would come out with his weapons to follow him to the world's end. Everyone saw that he was the king. In the camps the men would hurl a spear, or shoot with the bow, or throw the quoit, or wrestle or run, and he could beat the best of them at all these things. And then, too, think of his army, the earth shaking and his fleet, the sea taming and his horses, the thunder bearing and his trumpets, the spirits lifting. Think of his godlike scheme of making the world one kingdom under one worthwhile king, instead of all these dreary kings. But of course, you know this as well as I do. You have seen Alexander? No, indeed, Kay said, I have not. Well, it is hard to believe that anyone has not seen Alexander, Arnold said, for who knows what beauty is that is not? His hair is beautiful. Young man, he has the most marvellous eyes and a way of leaping onto a horse's back or into his chariot. I last saw him driving a chariot with white horses. He was dressed in leopard skins and had the crown of laurels on his brows, and people flung themselves down, crying that he was a god. He paused for a moment, thinking of Alexander. I am behind my time, if you understand me, young man. I was in the Anno Domini, and then I went back into the past, and the Anno Domini has moved on, and I only partly moved on, or perhaps I've moved on too far, if you understand. I think I do partly, Kay said. It was Raymond Lully who came to you in Spain with the elixir. I never much paid attention to the man's name, Arnold said. He was a thinker of my time. I do not believe in the thinkers of my time. Now, the thinkers of Alexander's time, Alexander's teacher Aristotle, now he was a thinker. Do you know, I have got your box of delights at present, Kay said. It really belongs to the man who came to you with the elixir. It is a trivial toy, Arnold said. I ought to have let that Spaniard take it and had his elixir in exchange and drunken deep of it, and then I would have gone on with Alexander over and over. But permit me to offer you these raisins. I dried them myself in the sun. Alexander used raisins in his campaign. Other soldiers wanted meat, bread, wine, sweetmeats. Alexander, only a few raisins and a little water. What was that race that you said you belonged to, young man? The English, Kay said. Some very small, unimportant race, Arnold answered. I had a list of all the nations in the world that marched with Alexander, and there was no English amongst them. We were in a great plain covered with tents. And one morning he hung out his golden banner, and all those countless nations blew their trumpets and hung out their standards, and away we went. It took a week for the army to pass out of the plain, and we went on over the mountains and across rivers, and the cities we visited got sacked, but usually the cities opened their gates to us and came out with gold and silver and precious stones. But allow me to offer you this pomegranate. Kay ate the pomegranate and a second one which the old man offered, and the old man stood up and said, Now, there was one special thing about Alexander that I have not told you yet. And when I have told you this, you will understand why it was that his soldiers thought he was a god. We were marching, if you understand, across a burning waste. Whether it was the Corinthian race or the Acaronian race, I cannot be sure by now. It may perhaps have been the Gedosian race. Know only that it was burning, pitiless desert of glare and death and dead men's bones. There were asps in the sand. The glare of the sand made men's blood so thin that an asp bite killed in 3 minutes. Men died of asps, thirst, glare and giddiness. The sand stretched, the sky arched, glare below, glare above, and the moon at night was terrible cold with the jackals howling. I made a poem of the sky. It arched, we marched, and parched, and parched. Some men's tongues shrivelled dry and dropped out with the parching. No water there, no drink, only pebbles and buttons to freshen our mouth with. Now some of the soldiers, found in a rock at dawn a little scoop of cold water, and they thought, now we will win promotion for ourselves by taking this to Alexander. And so they brought it to him. It was not more than is in this shell here, but in that place under the sun it was life itself, young master. Did Alexander drink it and give those men promotion? He was as thirsty as any other soldier there. No, he said, I will not touch what I cannot share with my men, and he poured it out into the sand to his fortune. I tell you once more that there has been nobody in this world like Alexander. Allow me now to recommend to you this egg of the island pheasant, which I have baked for you. For salt, here is the salt of the sea, and for bread this meal of pounded almond. Eat, eat, for the young can enjoy what they eat. And Kay ate gladly, for he was indeed hungry. You mentioned, young man, Arnold said suddenly, a certain person who has made a figure in the world. Julius Caesar? Kay said. Do not name that person to me. No, another, whose name it didn't catch. You called him great. Napoleon. That was the name, the old man said. Who was he? He was a soldier who conquered nearly all Europe, Kay said. Conquered Europe? That miserable collection of barbarians conquered? Could it be anything other than conquered? Arnold said. And you dare to place these petty pugilists of yours beside the godlike figure of Alexander? You talk with parochial insolence. Were you not so ignorant, it would be my duty to strike you dead, that you debase thus a godlike and glorious figure whose achievements cannot be weighed, because there is no balance with which to weigh them, nor any other who can compare to him. Presently, young man, I shall perfect yet another box, much greater than any I have made yet. I entered the past of Europe by one box, and I entered the past of Asia by another. But this third box I will go with Alexander where he rides on some planet in some starry place in heaven, and I will harness the comets for him, and we will come down, young man, and we will sweep away these paltry kings and English with you tails. We haven't got tails, Kay said. You know nothing, not even of your own race, Arnold said angrily, and you dare to presume to speak about Alexander. Kay was, by this time, terrified of Arnold of Tody, this extraordinary figure of fun whose matted beard was stuck with twigs and leaves, whose coat was of sail, palm leaf and old leather, who seemed to be 700 years old, and to have gone with Alexander the Great into India. He was now standing with flaming eyes and staring at Kay. Mad as a hatter, Kay thought. Now he'll probably tear me piecemeal. At this instant he heard himself called. Kay! Kay! And there behind him, in the little bay of the sea, so bright and beautiful, were two figures whom he saw to be Herne the Hunter with the woman of the oak tree. And on their left hands were these curious rings with the long ways crossed upon them. Come, Kay, they said, we can take you home. You must not be lost in the past in this way. Could you take Arnold of Tody too? He said. He's been awfully kind to me. Yes, they said, let him come. Kay did not see how they were to come, but when they reached the beach, the two called out of the sea, and there came tumbling the most beautiful dolphins, drawing a chariot made of one big seashell, the colour of mother of pearl. By the side of these were three bigger dolphins, one with no saddle for Herne the Hunter, two with high-backed saddles of white and scarlet coral, and stirrups and reins of amber beads for Kay and Arnold. We will mount these, Kay, the lady said as she stepped into her chariot and gathered the long reins of seaweed. And then follow me. Stick on tight, Herne said. They're odd mounts at first. The woman had already set off in her chariot. Kay, Herne and Arnold mounted the dolphins and at once leapt from the water, plunged in and leapt again, out on the long rush towards home. Soon they were speeding level with the chariot, going swifter and swifter, racing fish against fish, while the woman called to the team and sang to them. Fin on, leap, skim the foam, swim the green toppling comb of blue seas rolling home under the west wind from Yucatan to Ind. Shear the sea flowers to stubbles, crush the blue floor to bubbles, gallop and forget your troubles, skimming in gladness the sea salt's madness. Come flying fish, come whales, come mermaids with bright scales, come gulls that ride on gales, and albatrosses that no gale tosses. Speed with us as we thrust the blue ways none can trust, the green ways without dust, the salt ways foaming, attend our homing. Instantly they sped, the mermaids shot to the surface beside them. Many white, grey and gleaming birds swooped out of heaven to them, and the whales surged out from below, snorting out glittering fountains. With little wickering flickers, the flying fish leapt beside them like tiny silver arrows. The first moment or two on setting forth had been terrifying, but now, in all this glitter and leap and speed, with the lady singing, the dolphins ever going faster, the mermaids splashing water at him and splashing himself back at the mermaids, Kay loved it more than anything that had ever happened to him. It was exquisite to feel the dolphins quivering to the leap and a surge upwards into the bright lights with flying fish sparkling on each side, and then to surge down into the water, scattering the spray like bright fire full of rainbows, and then to leap on, wave after wave, mile after mile. In the thrill and delight of keeping this journey, Kay fell asleep. He was presently aware of Arnold getting off his dolphin at Tibbs Wharf near the Lock and Key. He half opened his eyes as though he heard the church bells chime, and then woke up drowsily in his seat at Sea King's under the balance of the dressing table where the box lay on the floor, and he went down to lunch. It was lunchtime and the others were there. "Well, Kay," Jemima said after a while, "you've seemed to us half asleep ever since lunch began. Aren't you going to say something?" "Say something," Kay said. "Where's Arnold?" "Arnold," they said. "Who's Arnold?" "Oh, it's very odd," Kay said, as he went to the window in order that he might pull himself together. It was very strange. But there at the top of the garden was a strange figure of Fun, dressed seemingly in old leather, bits of sail and palm leaf, staring with admiration at the church tower. "That's a tramp," Maria said. "Well, as it's Christmas Eve, I must take him some food," Kay said. And so he cut up some meat, some bread and a chunk of cheese, and pocketed 2 mince pies, and went out to refresh poor Arnold of Tody. But when he reached the top of the garden, Arnold had slipped through the wicket gate and was gone, and Kay looked along the lane and elsewhere for him, but Arnold was gone. Well, that concludes chapter 10. We just have 2 chapters left now. I really hope that Christmas can be saved, so do come back and see us again tomorrow when we'll start on the first part of chapter 11.